وسهلا بكل الذين ينضموا للاستماع إلى راديو بلدي أول راديو عربي أمريكي ويعنى بقضايا العرب في المهجر. برامجنا في راديو بلدي كل يوم جمعة من 8 وحتى 9 صباحا في بث حي ومباشر عبر WNZK راديو 690 AM. صباح الخير بلدي، صباح الخير لكل مستمعينا.
Welcome to Radio Baladi, the first Arab, Middle Eastern, and American simulcast radio show. Radio Baladi is broadcast every Friday morning on WNZK 690 AM from 8 until 9 Eastern Time on Good Morning, Michigan. Our call-in number 248-557-3300. And now, stay tuned for the best radio talk show on Arab and American issues.
I am Atef Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Good day, everybody. Turkey is home to more refugees than any other country in the world, with more than 3 million Syrians and 300,000 Iraqis. But many Turks now believe these Arab refugees have overstayed their welcome. And as the economic crisis in Turkey gets worse, attacks have begun to escalate both verbally and physically. Is Turkey becoming a mirror of the anti-minority sentiments that we see here in America? And are Arab governments responding to this by launching anti-Turkish campaigns of their own? To discuss the current and historical roots of Turkish-Arab grievances, we have a group of distinguished guests and experts. We have Dr. Zaher Sahloul. He is a co-founder of MedGlobal, which is a US-based humanitarian organization. We also have from Ankara, Turkey, Mr. Ömer Özkizilcik. He is an analyst and expert on foreign policy, Turkish foreign policy, and also on terrorism. Before we get started, I want to tell our viewers that we are coming to you not just on radio, but also by video through the application Zoom on Facebook. So go to the Facebook page of US Arab Radio and you can watch us there. Once again, US Arab Radio on Facebook. My first question is for my both guests, and let's start with Mr. Ömer. Mr. President Erdogan, Mr. Ömer, visited Saudi Arabia in July seeking investment and financial deals. So tell us about what is the status of relations between those two countries?
So when it comes to the Turkish-Saudi relations, the most important aspect here to remind everyone is that the deterioration of the relations after the Arab Spring and the murder of Jamal Khashoggi in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey, has been somehow bettered for the change to the better. And we have seen that this new era of rapprochement between Turkey and the regional states has also included Saudi Arabia, and that the Turkish-Saudi relations have improved. But that being said, there are still some obstacles, there are some still grievances ongoing, but we also see that the Saudi side has an interest in improving relations with Turkey, as the Saudi leadership, namely Mohammed bin Salman, wants to enjoy that he actually survived the Khashoggi case thanks to the less of a pressure from the United States of America. And we have seen that the Saudi leadership is now part of the regional normalization. Saudi Arabia has normalized relations with Iran, which was a major shift. Saudi Arabia has its channels of communications with Israel, and they have also tried to accommodate Turkey and to decrease tensions between Turkey and Saudi Arabia. And this was also mirrored from Ankara. Ankara was also interested in normalizing the relations and improving the relations. And the recent visit was not only limited to Saudi Arabia. The Turkish president started with Saudi Arabia, visited Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. And we can say that the biggest investment came from the United Arab Emirates. Obviously, there is a need for the Turkish economy to get some of the Gulf money flowing towards Turkey, as the Turkish economy is now in an area of change from the unorthodox policies of the past to the current orthodox policies implemented by Mehmet Şimşek and the Turkish new treasury president, Hafize Gaye, the first woman actually as a treasury president. And this new orthodox approach to the economy will need some funds from outside to actually to make better what have been done worse in the past, to correct the mistakes in the Turkish economy.
Dr. Zaher Sahloul, what do you think about that?
Good morning, first of all, Dr. Gawad and Mr. Omar. Very nice to meet with you and in this program. So Turkey and President Erdogan want to do what's best for Turkey over the past 2 decades or so. And right now, Turkey is in a situation that after kind of a problem in the relationship with the Middle Eastern countries, especially Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates and Egypt, following the Arab Spring, trying to mend fences, especially in light of the high inflation and deterioration of the economy. And they want to have go back to the zero problem or conflict with the Arab countries, especially the ones that have a lot of investment in other parts of the world, and they want to have a share of their investment in Turkey. So that's why we have improvement in relationship, not only with Saudi Arabia, but also with the United Arab Emirates, with other Gulf states. Of course, always the relationship between Turkey and Qatar was great, and with Egypt. So it's kind of a new initiative, political initiative by AK Party, by President Erdogan, to mend fences with countries that may improve also the economic situation in Turkey, especially that the Syrian crisis have been lingering for the past 12 years, and it doesn't look like there is an end in sight. So that's a major factor. I mean, Turkey is a home for 3.6 million Syrian refugees, a lot of other refugees from Afghanistan, Iraq, and other places. It's been a model country actually for Syrian refugees for some time, up to the last couple of years, because of the political situation and politicizing the refugee crisis. Turkey does what's better for Turkey, and Erdogan is doing what's better for Turkey, and that's what's happening right now.
Dr. Zaher, I know that you are a co-founder of MedGlobal, which is a humanitarian organization. So tell me a little bit briefly on your organization.
MedGlobal was started in 2017 with a group by a group of diverse doctors and nurses and humanitarians. At that time, there were three major humanitarian crises. The Rohingya crisis, because of the genocide of Rohingya in Myanmar, with the exodus of large number, 1 million Rohingya refugees to Bangladesh. Yemeni crisis with the war in Yemen. It was at that time the worst humanitarian crisis according to the UN. And of course, the Syrian crisis. I'm Syrian American, I'm a critical care specialist. I was involved in humanitarian relief to my homeland since 2011. So since the inception of MedGlobal, which was formed to improve healthcare in disaster regions, learning from the Syrian crisis, we provide training for doctors and nurses. We donate medical supplies, medical equipment. We strengthen healthcare systems. We send doctors and nurses to disaster regions. We are present right now in 10 countries, including Lebanon, Palestine, Syria, Yemen, Bangladesh, Sudan, Ukraine, Colombia, and Ecuador. And we impacted in the last 6 years about 5 million people, and we continue to grow.
And do you find cooperation from the Turkish authorities when dealing with Syrian refugees?
Definitely. I mean, we have our main office is in Turkey, like many other NGOs that are providing aid to northern Syria. As you know, Syria is divided right now to 4 Syrias. So when we talk about Syria, people have the imagination or the perception that it's only one country. It is 4 countries. Each one of them is ruled by a different entity, has different administration, have different access, have borders with other entities, and they do not talk to each other. So you have government or regime-controlled area that controls about 70% of Syria, including major cities. Then you have the northwest, Idlib, that has 4.2 million people, and it has borders with the regime, and they don't communicate. There's no free flow of goods and people. And then you have Turkish administrative areas in the north, and these are areas that have Turkish troops and Turkish flags, and hospitals that and banks that are built by Turkey, and in the northern part of Syria. And then you have the northeast that has cities like Deir ez-Zor and Raqqa and Al-Qamishli and Al-Hasaka, which has American troops and SDF, Syria Democratic Forces, that is considered a terrorist organization by Turkey. So if you want to provide anything to the northern Syria that has 4.5 million people, northwest and northern Syria, and half of them are displaced from other parts of Syria, 1.5 million of them live in camps and tents, then you have to work out of Turkey. And Turkey has been very cooperative and helpful to NGOs that are providing aid to that region that has large number of Syrian displaced people and victims of wars, and of course, the refugees themselves in Turkey.
Omar, Turkish inflation is up about 50%. The lira, Turkish lira, is down in value 30%. Tell us about the impact of the refugees' presence on these numbers, on the Turkish economy generally.
Usually, if we speak from just an economic point of view, there's a difference between the reality and the Turkish perception. In reality, we know that the Turkish growth of recent years were mainly driven by the Syrian refugees who were a cheap manpower. And we also know that the Syrians have contributed to the Turkish economy, that they have brought in Arab investments to Turkey, and also that the European Union funds were of great importance for the Turkish economy. But that being said, with this decreasing economic situation in Turkey and the high inflation rate, the loss of the value of the Turkish lira, we have a situation in which people are more and more hostile towards the Syrian refugees. And here I think the biggest example to understand how this is being evolved in common life, in the daily lives of the people, I think we have to look to Istanbul. Istanbul, the major city of Turkey, the economical heart of Turkey, has officially 60 million people living there. but the real number is much higher, as we have Syrian refugees there, we have unregistered Syrian refugees from other towns who live in Istanbul for work. We have Turkish citizens who are not registered in Istanbul but still live in Istanbul for work. We have many tourists going and flocking into Istanbul. And then we have the foreign investors who buy homes in Istanbul. Some people like the Iranians and the Iraqis to get the Turkish citizenship. Others, just because Turkey is very cheap, they buy houses in Turkey. And this has skyrocketed the prices of housing and the prices of rents in Turkey incredibly. It's very hard actually now to live in Istanbul. And as the inflation skyrocketed as well, and the Turkish lira lost its value, so all came together. And now, especially in Istanbul, the people are fed up, and they see that the reason for the let's say the high price of rents in the marketplace for housing are due to the high number of foreigners, the high number of refugees living in Istanbul. So they see that they have to pay a high rent because there are many Syrians who compete for the same houses as the Turks. And this creates some social tensions, and this is further facilitated and even provoked by some far-right anti-migrants, racist political parties or political figures. And I think what is not known in the international media or not understood is that usually Turkish nationalism is different than European or Western nationalism. And the Turkish, among all of the Turkish political parties, the ones who are most supportive of the Syrian refugees are actually the Turkish nationalist MHP, the coalition partner of the AKP of Erdogan. But we have now, with the Zafer Party and Ümit Özdağ, a new type of nationalism in Turkey. And this new type of nationalism is an imported one. And the rhetoric used by this anti-refugee political party is exactly the same rhetoric of European far-right anti-migrant political parties. What Ümit Özdağ says, it can be translated into French. We just need to exchange Syrian with Muslim or Arab. We can what the AfD in Germany says about the Turks, the same has been said by Ümit Özdağ, the far-right political leader, about Syrians in Turkey. So it's the same rhetoric, the same mechanism, the same propaganda. And this is a nationalism which was imported into Turkey by this far-right political party, as it has seen that there is a gap in the political atmosphere in Turkey. And now, recently, we have a new development, which was that when the presidential elections got to the second round, the opposition leader, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, aligned with Ümit Özdağ and promised him 3 ministries and the intelligence presidency among the ministries, the interior ministry, and changed its rhetoric to a very harsh anti-refugee, anti-Syrian rhetoric, the main opposition leader. And this provided in the Turkish public space more legitimacy to racism and to hatred towards refugees. And all of these coming together has now the bad economy, the new import of nationalism from Europe, the legitimacy provided by the main opposition leader to these nationalist anti-refugees rhetorics have unfortunately increased the sentiments against Syrian refugees in Turkey. And one can expect that verbal and physical attacks against Syrian refugees will unfortunately increase in Turkey in the coming period.
We're going to take a break, a brief break. When we come back, I want to ask Dr. Sahloul whether he thinks the Syrian refugees really want to go back to their homeland. Now, you talked, Mr. Omar, about some sort of racism that is going on in Turkey. When we come back from the break.
Were you recently at the emergency room urgent care, or at your doctor's office, being told you need a hand, wrist, or elbow specialist? At the Katranji Hand Center, we offer the latest techniques in hand, wrist, and elbow care. From sports injuries to work injuries to everyday hand, wrist, and elbow problems, the specialists at Katranji Hand Center are here to get you back on track. Call us in Troy today at 248-869-4263 or visit us at katranjihandcenter.com to schedule your appointment today.
Get ready for an amazing experience at Ishtar Restaurant on 15 Mile Road in Sterling Heights. Enjoy excellent hospitality from owners Ali Al-Baghdadi and Fatty Bottom, serving the best in Mediterranean food. Try Chef Ali Al-Baghdadi's famous shawarma, the best Iraqi grills and food, and the best Arabic and international dishes. Dine in our authentic atmosphere or take out. Call 586-698-2585 or check us out on Facebook. Ishtar Restaurant practices all CDC guidelines and is open every day, 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. Have an amazing experience today at Ishtar Restaurant, 3625 15 Mile Road, Sterling Heights.
When you're looking for the best in optical care, Dr. Imad Nakash is your doctor to see. With years of experience and thousands of successful procedures performed, you can trust your eyes to Dr. Imad Nakash. See Dr. Imad Nakash and his professional staff for your eye care needs. There's 2 locations to serve you. In Hazel Park, call 248-336-3937. 248-336-3937. In Rochester Hills, call 248-299-3937. That's 248-299-3937.
I am Atef Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Welcome back to our discussion on Radio Baladi. We are discussing Turkey, the refugees, and the Arabs. And my question now for Dr. Zaher Sahloul. International law says the return of refugees must be voluntary. Do you think, Dr. Sahloul, that the Syrians, the refugees in Turkey, want to return to their homeland?
Yeah. Well, this is the $10 million question, Dr. Abdul Jawad. What do you think? As you know, and the audience know, that the Syrian crisis, Syria used to be home for refugees for a long time. I mean, Syria received Palestinian refugees after the Nakba and the Naksa, Lebanese refugees, Iraqi refugees, and before that, many refugees from Central Asian countries. So that's why we have the diversity that we have in Syria. In general, people in Syria are very open to receiving refugees. They would not have left their homeland if the situation in Syria is safe. The Arab Spring started in Syria in 2011 with demonstrations to change the regime because the regime has been in existence for half a century. And it was very oppressive regime, very brutal, tortured to death many people. And there was no democracy, no freedoms until now, of course. The regime responded to the initial demonstrations with extreme brutality, shooting at people in the demonstrations, putting them in prison, torturing them to death, using industrial torture, using the army against people who are defenseless. And with time, people carried arms, and then countries interfered, including Turkey and the Arab states and USA and Iran and Hezbollah and everyone else. And then we had a civil war that led to the departition or the partition of Syria now to the 4 areas that I've mentioned, and also to the killing of 500,000 people, disappearance of 130,000 people in the prisons, using of chemical weapons more than 300 times, using siege and barrel bombs against civilians, killing more than 900 doctors, and bombing more than 980 hospitals, according to the Physicians for Human Rights. And siege, using siege, barbaric siege that we've seen in the Middle Ages against civilians by the Syrian regime itself. So that's why people fled from outside of Syria. I mean, there is a poetry about that if your land is safe, you would not have put your children in the sea so they can drown. And we've seen many people in Syria drowned in the Mediterranean, fleeing the atrocities that was inflicted on them by everyone else, especially the regime. That's why we had 6.5 million refugees, people who are living outside of Syria. In Europe, we have 1 million refugees. In Germany, we have 250,000 refugees. In Egypt, we have 1.5 million refugees. In Lebanon, we have 700,000 refugees. In Jordan, we have 300,000 refugees. In Iraq, and we have 3.5 million refugees in Turkey. And these are the neighboring countries, of course. But Syrians have actually fled to every country in the world. There was some estimates that Syrian refugees are right now present in 168 countries in the world. They are leaving bombs. They are leaving lack of future. They are leaving suffocating regime that has been in existence for 50 years, since the father of this current president. So there was a recent poll, Dr. Abdul Jawad, among Syrian refugees that happened by the United Nations. Poll among Syrian refugees. Would you like to go to your homeland? And guess how many of them said, I would like to go voluntarily to my homeland out of the 100% of the refugees? Only 1% of the Syrian refugees, and this happened last month after the normalization with the Assad regime and inviting him to the Arab Summit. Only 1% said, I would consider going back to home. That means 99% still consider Syria as unsafe. So when we talk about voluntarily Syrian refugees going back to Syria and forcing them to go back actually by many countries, including Turkey, unfortunately, and Lebanon and other countries, this is against their will. It is not voluntarily, it's forced. What's happening in Turkey right now is forcing Syrian refugees to go back. President Erdogan recently mentioned that 1 million Syrian refugees, or close to 1 million, returned back to north of Syria, and Turkey has been building many apartment buildings for them and hospitals and stuff like that. We appreciate the building of apartment buildings to Syrian refugees, but these are not people who are going voluntarily. According to international humanitarian law, you have to have 3 conditions for refugees to go back to their homeland. Voluntarily, that means I believe that my country is safe, so I'm going back. By the way, all Syrians love Syria and they want to go back when it's safe, like any other nationality. We're not fond of other countries, but we are there because it is unsafe in Syria. And the second thing, it has to be dignified. I mean, if you go back, there should be house, there should be a school, there should be healthcare, there should be rebuilding. Half of Syria destroyed by the crisis. And the third thing, that it has to be safe. It is not safe. Syrian refugees who are going back to Syria are bombed by the Assad regime. Syrian refugees who are going back to Syria are put in prisons. Some of them are killed by the Assad regime. It is not safe. It is not voluntarily. It is not dignified. So why would someone go back? That's why we have now, a couple of weeks ago, we had 700 refugees drowned in the Mediterranean. That was in the news. Do you know how many Arab and people who went to the street to demand justice for the 700 refugees, half of them from Syria, who drowned in the Mediterranean? 0. The only people who went to the street and demonstrate about the refugees are from Greece, because the people drowned near Greece. So there is a lot of refugees. They will stay there. I mean, according to the UN, the average time of refugees nowadays in any part of the world is 30 years, 30 years. We're still early in the crisis in Syria. There is no resolution inside. There is no political transition that's stipulated by the United Nations Security Council 2254 that stipulate that we will have some changes in Syria so people can close the chapter and go back. We don't have that in Syria. People want to have some change. That means the Assad regime says, okay, we're going to have amnesty. We're going to let people know that there are people who disappeared in the prison died. So they have a closure. We will not put people tortured in prison. That we will have a third party in Syria who will say, okay, we will guarantee the safety of people who go back. When that happens, people will go back voluntarily. They don't have to be forced to go back voluntarily. This is not happening.
That's fascinating. Mr. Omar, any comment on what we just heard?
Yes, actually, I think it was a very interesting points made by Mr. Zaher, and I think we can only sign all of them, and I can only fully agree with what he said so far, except that this is the 10 million question. I think this is the very first question, and this is the most easy question if we are honest. They will not return. So I think we should not make any real discussions about the possibility of Syrian refugees going back. The best case scenario is that some 100,000 will return, and that's it. The most biggest majority of Syrian refugees, whatever happens, will stay in their host countries. And the Syrian refugees in Turkey, they will stay in Turkey. They will become an essential part of the Turkish people and of the Turkish community. The kids who came to Turkey when they were 1 year old, 5 years old, they are now going to school. Some children, Syrian children, are now have taken their education in Turkish schools and are now going to Turkish universities. They are in their socialization more Turk than they are Syrian. And many Syrian children, they don't know Syria. They don't have any memory from Syria. And the people have built their livelihoods in Turkey, and it's just not possible. I always say this, the Turkish migrants who went to Germany for jobs, they did not return back to Turkey, even though there was never a war in Turkey, and the economy has been skyrocketed, and the economy has better to the best possible after that. But this Turkish migrants in Germany stayed in Germany, and then an essential part of Germany now. And the same will happen to the Syrians. But the only issue here is no one wants to tell the truth, and no one wants to say they are going to stay here, because this is politically a suicide to say this in the Turkish public. And here, in regards to the return of Syrian refugees, we have seen that some Syrian refugees officially voluntarily returned, but there's always skepticism about that. And we know that most of these voluntary returns have been forced to sign the voluntary return papers. But if we break it down to the numbers, these are some hundreds. You cannot send 3.3 million Syrian refugees via this method back to Syria. And the project of the Turkish president, supported by Qatar, to make housings in northern Syria for 1 million Syrians, this is a project which will take some years to implement. It will not be implemented overnight. And we know that the return of Syrian refugees, the ones who will return, which are some 100,000, most maximum, this will happen over a longer period. What needs to be done is a clear communication that Turkey needs a strategy for hosting and integrating so many Syrian refugees into the Turkish society, and that Turkey is not alone in this. Unfortunately, we see that neither the Arab countries nor the European Union nor the United States of America are really ready to help Turkey in this. We have seen that the European Union has given some money to Turkey in exchange for not accepting Syrian refugees into Europe, and Turkey preventing Syrian refugees to go to Europe, but that's not enough. What we need are financial support, we need social support, we need a communication strategy, and we need social support. For instance, why are so many Syrian refugees living unregistered and registered in Istanbul? If we break down, Turkey has 81 gowanates, but Syrians live in only 10 of them. And this creates the reality that in some neighborhoods, Syrians are more than Turks. And this creates more racism in social life, and this prevents the integration of Syrians. We need to have a strategy that would foresee the migration of Syrian refugees inside Turkey to the 81 governorates. If this would happen, in all of the Turkish population, the Syrian refugees are make 4%. 4% isn't that much. But if they are accumulated in certain areas, this creates tensions and this creates problems. And secondly, we have seen that despite so many years ongoing, and despite I personally knowing that Syrians are really fond of learning new language, and they have a good capability of learning new language, that the Turkish state basically failed to teach Turkish to the Syrian refugee community. And this needs to be changed. The Syrians still cannot speak good Turkish enough, and this has to be changed. And last but not least, there needs to be a discussion about the legal framework. Turkey, and I think the European Union can play here an important role, and the Arab states as well, need to have another legal status for Syrians to achieve. The situation now is that they are under temporary protection. And under temporary protection, they are not like a citizen or resident of Turkey. Their rights are limited. And they are always perceived like the ones who have to return back eventually. And the only option out of this legal status is to get the Turkish citizenship. But the Turkish citizenship itself is very difficult to get, especially due to the political obstacles that the opposition is saying Turkish authorities giving Syrian refugees the Turkish citizenship are doing so due to the electorate behavior of Syrian refugees.
Yes. Mr. Omar, we're gonna talk a little later about what is needed in that situation. But let's take a break now. When we come back, I have a question for Dr. Sahloul about the U.S. What the U.S. is the U.S. doing enough? After the break.
Life for Relief and Development has now been rated as one of the best charities for humanitarian aid. Life's humanitarian projects span the globe, and Life is celebrating its 30th anniversary of providing essential life-saving aid to people and communities in 36 countries, regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background. Where there is life, there is hope. And when disaster occurs here or around the world, including being one of the first responders to the Turkey-Syria earthquake crisis, Life for Relief and Development rushes in to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. We are looking to help the earthquake victims, and we take 0% overhead on emergency donations. So please help improve these efforts. Learn more about our involvement to help the helpless and bring hope where it's needed most. And make your tax-deductible donation to Life for Relief and Development now at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493. That's 248-424-7493. Kashat's Mediterranean Market in Shish Kebab offers a great array of your favorite Mediterranean meals. Meals range from lamb specialties, shawarma sandwiches, and seafood dinners. Plus, they offer big trays of your favorite food and so much more. Kashat's Mediterranean Market in Shish Kebab is located at 32839 Northwestern Highway in Farmington Hills and is open from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. So stop in or call Kashat's today at 248-538-9552. That number again, 248-538-9552. Kashat's Mediterranean Market in Shish Kebab will definitely leave you satisfied. With more than 30,000 successful in vitro fertilizations, IVF Michigan is now ranked as one of America's best fertility clinics according to Newsweek magazine. IVF Michigan fertility centers are the recognized leaders in high-quality fertility care. With locations in Bloomfield Hills and 9 other cities in Michigan and Ohio, IVF has experts in all aspects of the field. A founding member, American board-certified Dr. Nicholas Shama, is one of the leading reproductive endocrinologists in Michigan and Ohio. He has performed over 20,000 successful IVF cases, and it's helped thousands of couples fulfill their dreams of parenthood. When it's time to get personalized care from Dr. Nicholas Shama at one of America's best fertility clinics, call IVF Michigan Fertility Centers in Michigan and Ohio toll-free at 855-952-9600. 855-952-9600.
I am Atef Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Welcome back to Radio Baladi. We are discussing Turkey, the refugees, and the Arabs. But I want also to see if the U.S. is doing enough to help meet the needs of the refugees in Turkey. Dr. Sahloul, you are based in the U.S. and you have a first-hand knowledge on the issue.
This is a great question, Dr. Abdul Jawad. I spent more than half life in the United States. I was raised in Syria, was educated in Syria in medical school, came to Chicago 32 years ago. And I've been a citizen of this great country that we enjoy a blessing of everything, abundance of all kinds of stuff, including freedom. And also, I believe in civic engagement. So I've been civically engaged throughout, before the crisis even, and throughout the crisis, meeting with my senators, talking about what's happening in Syria. Every time I go into medical mission, I come back with stories and pictures. I show them to Senator Durbin and Senator Duckworth, a meeting with the State Department, meeting even with President Obama. I met with him in 2013 in the White House. And I told him, Mr. President, your legacy will be determined by what you do in Syria. And he laughed at that time and he said, but my legacy will be determined by other things. I told him that Syria will be the main thing, because I believe what happened in Syria is a major problem in foreign policy in the United States. The reason that people went into the streets, or one of the reasons, is because at that time, if you remember, Dr. Abdul Jawad, President Obama said Assad lost his legitimacy. Secretary Clinton at that time encouraged the Syrian people to go back. They felt that they have the back of the United States of America. That's why they went into the streets in abundance. Tens of thousands of people went into the street in Hama and Homs and Damascus and Aleppo, because they said, well, the United States of America now is supporting us. And then when President Obama said, there is a red line, do everything with the Syrian people, President Assad, but don't use chemical weapons. You can kill them with anything but chemical weapons. Then Assad used chemical weapons in Al-Ghouta, which killed 1,600 people, including many children while they were sleeping in August 23rd, 2013. And Obama blinked. He did not punish Assad for that time. And that was a major milestone in the Syrian crisis. And then the United States intervened in Syria, not to support the Syrian people, to fight ISIS, because it considered ISIS the major enemy to the United States. That's fine. ISIS is a terrorist organization. It's fine to fight it. But then they ignored Syria. After they won the victory against ISIS, which is a terrorist organization, they forgot about Syria. Syria right now is not in the priority of the United States. Not in the top 10 priorities of the United States. You have Ukraine, you have Russia, you have China, you have climate change, you have too many immigrants south of the border. President Biden did not mention Syria only one time in the last 2.5 years after the earthquake. I think he mentioned Syria. So there's no U.S. envoy now with high caliber U.S. envoy on Syria. So in order for anything diplomatically to move on the Syrian issue, you see the United States, which is still the most powerful country in the world, has to lead diplomatically on Syria. Because if you want to implement United Nations Security Council resolution that stipulates pathway to end the crisis, which everyone agreed, including Russia and China, then the United States has to lead. And United States has not been leading. They spend a lot of, United States, my country, I'm proud that we spend a lot of money to help Syrian refugees and Syrians in general, more than any other country in the world. I think $7 billion were spent by the United States to help the Syrian refugees. I have to check the numbers, but I think that's an estimate. And they continue to be generous with that. But besides the humanitarian issues, they're not leading diplomatically. They are focused on Syria from the United States looks on Syria through the three things that traditionally meets the interest of the United States: protection of Israel, the free flow of oil, which Syria is not relevant to that, and fighting terrorism. Other than nowadays, they added one more thing, which is the Captagon, because Syria became a narco state. We produce more than 80% of the Captagon in the world. Captagon is a stimulant that was in the 1960s, and then people forgot about it. Now it's produced in Syria, and it's exported to every other country in the region, including Jordan and Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and also Europe and Turkey. So Syria is becoming now the main exporters of Captagon by the Syrian regime, and they get about $4 to $40 billion out of the Captagon. So United States now is more concerned about the Captagon than the welfare of the Syrian people and the Syrian refugees.
Yes, you are right. The U.S. should make the refugees a priority. We're not talking about Syria here. We are talking about refugees. But Mr. Omar, you know better than anybody, Turkish President Erdogan wants to send back 1 million refugees to Syria within a year, not just for economic reasons, but also in response to grassroots and opposition sentiments. Do you think the anti-minority sentiments in the US is a contributing factor or a reflection of a wider international trend?
So first of all, when it comes to the Turkish policy regarding this 1 million, we have to say that the far-right anti-migrant opposition leader, Mutezda, his plan was to send all refugees in 1 year. The plan of Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, the main opposition leader, was to send back all refugees in 2 years. And the plan of the Turkish president is to facilitate the return of 1 million Syrian refugees in 5 years. So there's an important difference, first of all, in terms of the time plan, the timetable, and secondly, the way of return. So while the opposition wants to basically kick out the Syrians by force, the Turkish government's approach is that it should be facilitated by incentives inside Syria. And this incentive is mainly housing. The belief is that if we have housing and economy and industrial zones, then this and a safe environment, the Syrian refugees will return. And actually, there was a return of up to 600,000 so far. The number of Syrian refugees registered in Turkey have decreased from 3,700,000 to 3,300,000. So despite the birth of new Syrian refugees, it decreased 400,000 over the recent 2 years. But that being said, I do not believe that this 1 million project will have a significant impact. In 5 years, the number of Syrian refugees would have increased due to the high birth rate of Syrians, which will later on be the same like the Turks. Anyhow, I think this 5-year plan, even if it works out as expected, most of the refugees will stay in Turkey. And now in regards to a question, what is the trend here? I think the trend against migrants and refugees is a global one. I personally have the greatness that I was born in Germany as a Turkish migrant. I came to Turkey and I live here, and I can compare what's the discourse, what are the rhetorics, what are the propaganda, and it's the same. As I previously explained, the Turkish nationalism doesn't have an anti-migrant attitude. Actually, Turkish nationalism takes pride in accepting migrants as they feel that they are the saviors of the world. So this is the usual Turkish nationalism. But the Turkish nationalism, which is quite new in Turkey, is quite similar to the European and Western nationalism, and which is anti-migrants, anti-refugees, and racist in its core. And we see that similar tendencies are not only limited to the Western Hemisphere, but we see that the Indian government has a similar approach, that Modi's political party has a similar approach. And I think just like terrorists learn from each other, racists learn also from each other. They see what's working, they see what's effective. We have now a very far right leader in Italy. We have Marine Le Pen, who is the biggest political figure in France. Macron did only win because the others didn't want Marine Le Pen, not because they wanted to support Macron. So in the core, Marine Le Pen enjoys the biggest support in France. We see that Modi is ruling over India. And we know that the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, the Hungary's president, Viktor Orban, they have all similar arguments, similar rhetorics. And this global trend for racism and anti-migration can only be countered if there's a global strategy for that. And if there's a global cooperation, global coordination, and a global aid for the people who need this support. And I think here that the Turks feel very much left alone. I know that in terms of numbers, there are some financial support for refugees globally. The UN has its programs. The European Union is giving some money to Turkey. But in terms of perception and the cause, this is just insufficient. The Turks feel that the world regards Turkey as a pool where, even as a prison where refugees can be held and prevented from going to other countries. So there needs to be solidarity. What can be this solidarity? Even if it's symbolic, accepting some refugees, even if it's symbolic statements showing solidarity with Turkey, and investing in Turkey in terms of easing the tensions for refugees and easing the living conditions for everyone in Turkey and helping. I think one of the major issues in terms of Syrian refugees in Turkey is that the Turks feel the Arab states, the Arab people, they are not doing enough. So and it's important to communicate and to show that what the Arabs are doing for the Syrian refugees in Turkey and to increase the support. And we see that the United States of America, from a Turkish perspective, is doing nothing for the Syrian refugees. So it's possible that the United States of America is doing something, but known in Turkey is nothing. The Turkish public, if you go ask anyone on the street, what has the US done for the Syrian refugees in Turkey, they would look you in the eyes and say, what are you asking about? There is nothing. And this needs to change.
Okay, Dr. Sahloul, we just heard that the Arabs are doing nothing or not doing enough. But I know that Qatar is one country that is helping Turkey build housing for the refugees. And Saudi Arabia is offering e-visas to Turkish citizens among 12 other countries. Now, do you think there is a division among Gulf states when it comes to treatment of refugees in Turkey?
Very good question, as usual, Dr. Abdul Jawad. I think this program should be in Turkish and air to Turkish language, because one of the problems that we have, that these programs and discussions that addresses these issues are not addressed to the Turkish people. And I agree with Omar that one of the failures of the Arabs and Syrians themselves, that they did not establish media that is talking to the great Turkish people, by the way. I mean, Turkey was a model country for Syrian refugees, provided them with of course, safe environment, urban environment, healthcare, education. I have many of my friends when I go to Turkey, and I've been in Turkey 50 times in the last 12 years. So I do my part. I go there, I take my family with there, we stay in hotels, we spend money, we buy everything, we come back. And this is the situation of many Syrians who live in the United States and Europe. And the money that is brought by this transactions is immense, but it's not estimated. Many Arabs also go to Turkey and they spend a lot of money because Turkey is perceived as a model country in the Middle East, where you have freedoms, you have great history, you have great culture, you have beauty, cuisine is excellent. The Turkish TV shows are famous in Turkey, and all kinds of things that you would like to have in a country that you want to spend time in. I mean, I can tell you about my organization, MedGlobal. After the earthquake, the painful earthquake in Turkey, the first thing that we have done that we went to Turkey and we met with public officials in Gaziantep. We toured the areas that were destroyed in Kahraman Marash and other cities, and we donated $250,000 to the Turkish authorities to build hospitals in Turkey. And many of the organizations that was established by Syrian Americans and others also did the same thing. Many Arab states have done the same thing, but this is probably not known to the Turkish public. We care about Turkey the same way that we care about any other country. I'm talking here from a humanitarian perspective. Turkey is a great country, and it's also one of the most powerful economic countries in the world. I mean, it's one of the top 15 countries in terms of economy. It has 100 million people. We have a lot of historic ties with Turkey. So these things are not talked about with the Turkish people from the Arabs who believe that this historic connection with Turkey. And I think we have to do more of that. The Arab states, I don't know. I mean, I think I cannot control what Arab do or do not do with Turkey. It has to do with politics, of course. It has to do with disagreements. Every country has their own national interest. Sometimes you have conflict with the Turkish government related to many issues. And I think Dr. Omar has mentioned that in what happened between Saudi Arabia and Turkey, and it affects the relationship. I blame the Arabs, actually. I mean, 6.5 million refugees is a large number for Syrians, but they could have been supported by the very rich Arab countries who are pouring monies on everything. The United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and other, Oman. They could have absorbed many of them in their countries. And Syrians are known to be entrepreneurs who want to work, who want to build. They could have built the Rab al-Khali, the empty quarter in Saudi Arabia, if they're allowed to, but they're not allowed to. The Arabs are not doing their share in terms of supporting the Syrian refugees, and we blame Turkey for not doing their share. Turkey has done more than any other country to the Syrian refugees. The Arab are not the ones who did not. Look what's happening in Lebanon. They are treating Syrian refugees as fourth-class citizens. They are forcing them to go back to Syria so they can be killed. Syrians are afraid to leave their houses in Lebanon. So let's not talk about Turkey and forget what's happening in the Arab states. There are more racism towards Syrian refugees in the Arab states than what we have in Turkey. One of the Kuwaiti ministers said, they asked him, why don't you take Syrian refugees? He said, they will not feel comfortable in Turkey because we have higher class in Turkey and they will not be integrating with our culture. That's a Kuwaiti minister has mentioned. Look what's happening in Tunisia about West African refugees. There's a lot of racism against refugees in the Arab states everywhere. In Syria, unfortunately, we still call Palestinians who've been in Syria and born in Syria, third and fourth generation, we call them Palestinian refugees. So there is racism in the Arab states against refugees. But it's unfortunate what's happening in Turkey. It's politicized. I agree that this is a global phenomena against refugees in general. But let's not blame only Turkey and forget what's happening in the Arab states. The best model actually in the Arab states towards Syrian refugees is Egypt. Even though that Egypt has 100 million people and it doesn't have the resources among Arab countries, but Syrians are well integrated. They're allowed to do their businesses. They're thriving. Egyptians are loving them and they are loving the Egyptians. They're intermarrying. And this is a great model which should be highlighted. And hopefully other Arab states will feel jealous of this relationship between the Syrians and Egyptians. But shame on the Gulf states that they did not do their part in terms of absorbing Syrian refugees or supporting other countries that are hosting Syrian refugees that does not have the resources.
Okay, I would like to conclude on a lighter note. Mr. Omar, I read about, tell us about Turkish efforts to push the international community to call your country Turkiya rather than Turkey. I have less than a minute, so be brief, please.
Oh, you gave me a very difficult task. So what I can say is that Turkey wants to change its name from Turkey to Turkey due to the misunderstanding of the animal Turkey and Turkey as a country. And it's hard to get used to it. Even I sometimes say Turkey and not Turkey. But officially, Turkey's name is in English language now Turkey, and Turkey wants everyone to use Turkey instead of Turkey, and this has been changed. And also a small notice about the integration and speaking to Turkish public. I think it's very symbolic that all of the Arab NGOs are in Istanbul or in Gaziantep, and we in Ankara, the capital of Turkey, don't have any access to the Arab NGOs. We have to travel to Gaziantep or to Istanbul to meet them. I am very jealous of that, and I want Arab NGOs to be in Ankara as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ömer Özkizilcik and Dr. Zaher Sahloul. And thank you all for the information and contribution. And I will meet you again the first Friday next month. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.